Today, the talk is about Bodhicitta, and this is a really important subject in Tibetan Buddhism because it is important to enter the Mahayana path, and the Vajrayana path is part of the Vajrayana, and so it's extremely important for the Vajrayana path as well. Now, Bodhi means awake, and Chitta means mind. And the goal of the Mahayana path, or part of the way, is to become a Bodhisattva. This is along the path to becoming a fully enlightened Buddha. And a Bodhisattva is, again, Bodhi, and a sattva means being. So an awakened being awakens because they have an awakened mind. They have bodhicitta. You could call it the mind of enlightenment. And I was just looking at, I got my copy of The Places That Scare You by Pema Chodron. That will be the next topic book we'll talk about on Tuesday evening, starting on the 5th of May. And so here is a quote from her in the book, The Places That Scare You. She's talking here about bodhicitta. It is the completely open heart and mind of bodhicitta. It is called the soft spot, a place that is vulnerable and tender. As an open wound, it is equated in part with our ability to love. So that might sound a little painful, but it isn't. So let's go into this. It's about weakening our armor, our defenses, weakening all kinds of things that we do to protect ourselves. It's about bravery and courage. And with the entry onto the actual becoming a bodhisattva, it is the experience of the realization of emptiness. And with that realization, you realize there is no self to protect, because there is no permanent, unchanging, unique self. That what we call a self is totally interdependent. And you could say, to put it another way, that part of that developing a soft spot is to realize this interdependence, that you are not separate, that we are interconnected to everything and everybody on the face of the earth. So there's an element of bravery and courage in it. In fact, one of the words for bodhisattva in Tibetan is warrior. Pawo is the word. And what it means is that a bodhisattva is not turned away by fear. It isn't that they're fearless, but they don't give in to the fear. They experience the fear and they go beyond it. They're willing to be vulnerable. So it's really important to have this soft spot. I led the funeral for Pam Holtom, who was the previous Lama at the Minneapolis KTC. And afterwards, of course, we had the traditional lunch. And there were some Tibetans that sat at the table with me. And there was a woman that sat next to me, and we were talking. And I don't know why she said this, but this really struck me. And I've repeated this over and over again. that if you have a warm place in your heart for yourself, you will be comfortable wherever you go. And so this soft spot is about having a soft spot, not only for all beings, but for yourself. It's not, I have a soft spot for everybody else, but I hate myself. And in fact, on the 10th of May, I will be doing a talk on Tonglen and actually Tonglen practice. And that's where I'm going to start, is developing this warm, soft spot for ourselves in our heart. So here is a quote from Karmapa. It is important to recognize that love, concern, and affection are not optional. We do not need any reason to offer love and affection. It is possible to have love without prices and without conditions. We do not need any further compensation beyond just giving our love. And love is an infinitely renewable resource. For the well-being of society and for our own personal growth as well, it is crucial that we learn to love without needing a reason or a reward. And here is another quote of his, and it is, we could say that it is equally important in the long run for our own good and the good of others that we are initially kind to ourselves. So, while bodhicitta is essential for the bodhisattva's path, it is essential that we don't forget about ourselves. And so what happens is we start out working with our own confusion, our own ignorance, our own passion and desires, our own irritation and aggression and so forth. But as we are able to subdue them somewhat, not eliminate them, but have them have less of an influence on them, then we go on to work with all sentient beings, because we really can't travel the path until we do that. And again, if we can't love ourselves, we really can't love other people. Our love will be with prices on it and with conditions on it. So it is essential for us to learn how to love without conditions ourselves and all beings. Here's a quote from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. Sentient beings remain sentient beings by continually working for their own benefit. Buddhas become Buddhas by continually working for the benefit of others. So, before I go into more about bodhicitta and traveling the path, here are a couple of stories that I would like to relate to you. Because it's sometimes we think that by having bodhicitta, this warm, soft spot, being willing to experience pain when we see others suffering, means that we become a doormat, that other people walk over us. And that's not the case. There's skillful beings that, in a way, there are times when you're helping a person create more negative karma for themselves by walking all over you. And so quite a few years ago, when I was doing construction work, and I was a monk at this time and a lama, I needed a pickup truck. And so I answered an ad in the local paper, contacted the man, and went over there and looked at the pickup truck. I liked it. We agreed on a price, and I wrote out a check. So then I drove home in my car, and he drove the pickup home. Then I got in the pickup, and he drove me to his house. As soon as I got in the pickup, he turned out to be a very conservative preacher. And he went on a rant about how the Buddha died. Buddhism is the deception of Satan. And unless I took Jesus Christ as my savior, I would die and go to hell too, just like the Buddha. And on and on and on. Well, fortunately, it was a short ride. And when I got there, got in the car, and in the truck, and drove home. And needless to say, I was a little irritated. So first thing in the morning, I called up my bank and I canceled payment on the check. And then I called him up. I only reached his answering machine, but I just said simply that you've been disrespectful to me and disrespectful to Buddhism, and I've canceled the check, and I will bring the truck back to you when I can find someone to drive it back with me. I certainly wasn't going to get in the car with him again. So I didn't even look for someone to drive the car back or the truck back. And after 3 days, he called me and drove over with his own driver, who happened to be probably the largest man he could find. And so they came and up to the back door, and I gave him the key, and he left. So I did this without, really getting angry with him. But on the other hand, I didn't let him walk all over me. So this is, you could say, it's forceful action. And it takes skillful means, it takes wisdom, and you have to be able to control your kleshas. If your kleshas are controlling you, then it doesn't work. But this is part of having this soft heart. And another part of having a soft heart is to realize that you have to let go of it. Just like you have to let go of the good times, you have to let go of the pain. If you keep holding on to the pain, then it becomes unbearable. So another story, this is about Khenpo Karta Rinpoche. And when I was in a 3-year retreat, he would bring very good teachers, the very highest lamas in the lineage, into retreat for us to receive teachings from and blessings and so on and so forth. And so Tai Situ Rinpoche came in this time. And there was a throne set up for Tai Situ Rinpoche, and on it was this beautiful bell and dorje set that I had never seen before. And it was a Nyingma set because the bell had a little circle in it, cast in it between the base or the body of the bell, and then the handle, which is half a vajra. And anyway, after Tai Situ left, he was there for at least 2 days, the bell and the dorje disappeared. It was gone. So later, Rinpoche told us this story. that that bell and dorje had belonged to Jamgun Khantrul the First, and it was at his monastery, Trangu Monastery, not Jamgun Khantrul's monastery, but Trangu Monastery, where Khenpo Rinpoche was when he first became a monk until he fled in 1959. And he said that what happened in 1959 was that the Red Army got up in the mountains above the monastery and without warning started shelling the monastery. And at that time, you might say it became complete chaos and people started running all over the place. And that was the last time that bell and dorje set was seen. Until Rinpoche went back, probably it was for the celebration of the 17th Karmapa's return to Serpu. That's what I would guess, that he, in that trip, he stopped by the Trangu Monastery. And when he was there, the monastery had been rebuilt, and there was an old monk that had this bell and dorje on his puja table. And so Rinpoche asked the monk if he would sell it, and the monk agreed. And Rinpoche said that he paid enough to buy 5 horses in Tibet, which was a lot of money. On the other hand, he never told the monk that this belonged to Jamgun Khantrul the First, because then, of course, the monk may not have parted with it. And so now he brought it back and he gave it to Tai Situ Rinpoche. And that's where Rinpoche ended his story, but it's pretty obvious that what happened then was Tai Situ Rinpoche held that until Jamgun Khantrul was discovered, and then gave it to Jamgun Khantrul the Fourth. So that's a little story about how bodhisattvas can behave. Now, in the White Tara practice that we do here, there are some lines in here that have been written by Jamgun Khantrul the First. He is the author, in fact, of the White Tara practice that we do. And these lines are done after the first music. And this is about Bodhicitta. It starts out with and this is the middle of this short prayer. It's not very long, it's just a few lines. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha until I attain enlightenment, which is a standard refuge prayer. Then the bodhicitta part is this: I will develop bodhicitta in order to perfectly accomplish the benefit of myself and others. So here, this is this aspiration to develop it. I will develop it. And the motivation for developing it is to perfectly accomplish my own benefit and the benefit of others. And then, having developed the mind of perfect enlightenment, I will take care of all beings. I will follow the beautiful, delightful conduct of the Bodhisattva. May I attain Buddhahood so that I can benefit all beings. So that last phrase, may I attain Buddhahood so I can benefit all beings, sums up the essence of the bodhicitta motivation. And then the actions is described as beautiful, delightful conduct of a bodhisattva. So bodhicitta is the awake mind, and it's also the intention to awake in order to help yourself and all beings. And in actuality, we have gone over this a little bit in our karma class last class, was that it is in our own best ultimate interest to benefit others, because in doing so, we automatically benefit ourselves. So there are two types of bodhicitta. One is absolute bodhicitta. This is the ultimate. You could say it's our Buddha nature. And so it is, quote, the union of the sphere of phenomena and primordial wisdom. Here is a quote from Tralek Rinpoche in his book, Lojong. Absolute bodhicitta is our authentic and original state of being. There is an open, empty, clear, spacious, and luminous clarity of mind that is beyond concepts, ideas, or sensations. And so here are some synonyms, and this is not an exhaustive list. I just don't want to be going on forever with synonyms. Buddha nature, the natural state. Emptiness, the nature of mind. Ordinary mind, the ground of being. White Tara, mother luminosity. All of these are absolute bodhicitta. And so this is something that is uncovered. It's impossible to develop it. And this is why we travel the path. And in fact, there's a story at this point that I would like to relate. And it's about the boy. This happened in Tibet. And he was in the kitchen with his mother in their house. And he said to his mother, I'd like to see Dad. And she said, okay, but this is going to take some time. We're going to have to do some traveling. And so they pack some food, a lot of food actually, and they go out the kitchen door outside and start traveling through the mountains and valleys in Tibet, going through these high mountain passes. And after traveling for a very long time, eventually they get up to this one pass and they're looking down on this house, and the mother tells the boy, your father's in that house. And so he's overjoyed after all this time. So they go down, enter the front door of the house, and there is Dad. The boy runs over to him. The dad picks him up, and they're all happy. And then Mom says, oh, let's go and make some tea for Dad. And so they go into the kitchen to make tea, and it's the kitchen that they left from. So your ultimate bodhicitta can't go anywhere. So there is relative bodhicitta. And this is awakening so that you can help others awaken. And as I said, it has an element of aspiration, and the other element is engagement. And again, from the same book that I quoted Tralek Rinpoche a minute ago, he says this, quote, you could define absolute bodhicitta as wisdom mind, and relative bodhicitta as a cultivation of a compassionate heart. So to go on here, Asanga, who was a 4th century Indian master, regarded bodhicitta as the intention to wake up in order to free all beings from samsara. And again, this points to intention, that in Vajrayana Buddhism, intention is more important than our actual actions of body, speech, and mind, because they guide us in the proper direction if our intention is proper. Shanti Deva elaborated on this, and so he says it's primarily a commitment to engage in the practice of awakening. And again, it's motivated by the wish to help free others from samsara and from their suffering. And this goes back to where I started with Pema Chodron. So you could say bodhicitta is the relative bodhicitta is the benevolent concern for all living beings. And it will have an element of both compassion and wisdom. And it is that combination that keeps you from getting walked all over. And it also keeps you from putting up armor and trying to protect that soft heart of yours. So from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shanti Deva, this is line or stanza 15 and 16. It's close to the very beginning of the book. This is what Shanti Deva says. In brief, the awakening mind should be understood to be of two types: the mind that aspires to awaken and the mind that ventures to do so. As is understood by the distinction between aspiring to go and actually going, so the wise understand in turn the distinction between these two. So this is important. When we do any of these deity practices, almost always we begin them or close to the beginning. Sometimes there's a lineage prayer that goes before this. There will be taking refuge and then generating bodhicitta, very similar to that prayer that I quoted at the very beginning. Let me scroll back to it, not at the very beginning, but close to it, from Jamgon Khantrul. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I attain enlightenment. I will develop bodhicitta in order to perfectly accomplish the benefit of myself and others. That is it in a nutshell, the refuge and engendering the bodhicitta. And so that's the aspiration. And then chanting the rest of the practice is actually traveling the path. That's engagement bodhicitta. Anytime we practice, we are doing something to help us travel the path. This is more than an aspiration. And then when we are in post-meditation, or when we get up from our cushion and leave the shrine room, then if we can maintain some sense of mindfulness, we can pay attention to where our mind is going as we go through the, you might say, the difficulties of life. And we can try to keep that motivation up of benefiting others and keep the idea of wisdom alive in our mind, and to make wise choices. And I have talked already a few talks ago about confession and purification, and when we make what I say, mistakes, when we do things that we regret and so forth, it's not the end of the world. We're empowered to purify it with confession and purification. This is something that is really important to remember, that what Tibetan Buddhism does is it empowers us to work with our own faults, our own weaknesses, our own downfalls, and so forth, skillfully to produce a growth, to produce traveling the path. My first teacher was Trungpa Rinpoche, and he had a phrase that I've used many times, and it's the manure of our experience. And the idea is that on the Bodhisattva path, all of the things that we do that we regret can be used like manure to help us grow that soft spot in our heart, to help us grow more wisdom, and so forth. So this is important. So I'm just about done here. So on the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path, and in Vajrayana, the 6 perfections are extremely important. You could say they are the core of the Mahayana path. And I talked a little bit about this in terms of the shrine yesterday, but just to go over what they are, the first one is generosity. And so we learn as we travel the Mahayana path what generosity is and how we can increase it more and more in our lives. These 6 perfections are called that because we're working on the perfection of each of these qualities. We don't have them yet relatively, and so we need to develop them. And then the next one is discipline. And so we start by avoiding doing harm to ourselves and by engaging things that are beneficial to ourselves. And of course, there is nothing that's more beneficial than for us to practice. And then we also avoid doing things that are harmful to other people. And we encourage ourselves to engage in actions that are beneficial to other people. So discipline is not punishing ourselves. And it's easy to forget that. And instead of doing confession and purification, just beat ourselves up when we do something that we consider wrong. And the funny thing is that this is all about our ego. And so one of the more bizarre experiences that you can have with your ego would be like this. You go to a dinner party. This is, of course, before this self-isolation. You eat, have a good time, you're smiling all night long, and then you go to the bathroom and look in the mirror, and there is some spinach stuck in your front teeth that have been showing every time you smile. And you get embarrassed and you feel like a fool and you start beating yourself up. That's all the ego. You haven't even done anything negative. What you have, it's humbling, and it's good to be humble. So it's important when we're beating ourselves up to understand that you can, if it's something you really did that was negative, it can be purified, and to purify it. And if it's something silly like that, then laugh it off and be a little more humble. So the third one is patience. And this is patience with your practice. Patience when you're around other people. Sometimes it's described as forbearance. On the other hand, it's not being patient with your faults. Being patient with the faults of other people. The fourth one is diligence, and it is described as joyful exertion. And so it's really important to, when you go into the shrine room and practice, to have a feeling of joy that you're able to do this, joy that you have met the teachings of the Buddha, and realize how fortunate you are. And want to do what you can to practice the path and make a difference in the lives of others as well as yourself. But again, going back to patience, is don't expect that this will happen quickly. It may happen quickly, it may not happen quickly. But you have to kind of give up this idea that I'm going to do this quickly. The fifth one is meditative concentration. And so the way we perfect that is, first of all, by practicing, because practicing is a form of meditative concentration. But it also is maintaining mindfulness as we go through our lives. You might say checking in to what's going on in your mind from time to time, and letting go of that monkey mind, getting to know the monkey mind, but then not being led around by the monkey mind. Don't look at the monkey mind as a problem. Make friends with it, and then it's not a problem because you see it's just a monkey mind. In the Mahamudra lineage supplication, there is a line in there that it's about the play of the mind. Nothing, the thoughts are nothing but the play of the mind. And play, in this case, the Tibetan word, is the same that would be used for kids playing a game or adults playing a game or playing music. It's just playing. It's just what the mind does. And if you can understand it as that, it's not going to be a problem. And actually, if you look at that monkey mind as a spoiled child, when you ignore a spoiled child or don't pay attention to what it wants, it just makes more noise. But eventually, it gets tired. And so, pay attention to that monkey mind, but only pay attention, don't react to it. You've got more important things to do. And the last is wisdom. And now we're talking here about prajna, which is relative wisdom. It can, as we develop more and more relative wisdom, it does transform into ultimate wisdom. So this is an important point. The perfection of relative wisdom leads to ultimate wisdom, but relatively, prajna or wisdom is being able to distinguish between what's important and what isn't important. Seeing, you might say, behind what's actually going on. And seeing clearly through this space where there's lots of space. A good example that I like is a bee in a telephone booth. Can be a big problem in a telephone booth, and we can get kind of worked up about this. Or if you're out walking in your garden and there's a bee in a flower. Well, the bee belongs with that flower and it's no problem. There's lots of space. This is a big garden. There's an open sky. So if we can get this feeling of spaciousness and openness, this is helping to develop wisdom.